Hello everyone and welcome to my studio. Karen Margulis here with another pastel painting demonstration, and today I'm going to share with you 3 tips to help you paint more effective flowering trees. It's springtime here in North Georgia. The trees are flowering, the dogwoods are gorgeous, but they're hard to paint. So come with me on this journey and we'll paint a flowering tree together. Thanks for joining me here. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe. It's no cost to you and you're notified. Click the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. And if you like these videos, if you like these demos, consider becoming a Patreon insider. I share 2 demos a week plus lessons, challenges, and so much more over on my Patreon group. The link will be in the description. I'd love to have you join us. All right, now let's get started with today's painting. I'll start off by sharing the reference photo. It's a grouping of some dogwood trees. Actually, the dogwood tree looks like it's behind some other taller trees. So I have to take out my artistic license here and eliminate a lot of this clutter. Excuse me. There's a road, there's a fence, there's a whole big dark conglomeration of trees in the distance. There's actually some geese here. There's so much going on, and I want this painting to be about the trees. So we're going to eliminate a lot of the clutter and focus solely on the tree. I will be working on a piece of Uart 400 grit. This is a 12 by 9 piece of paper, and let's have a look at the pastels that I'll be using. This is just an assortment of Mount Vision, Terry Ludwig, and a few Diane Townsend pastels. This is what I call my spring palette. I put these together at the beginning of spring, and I use them for most of my spring landscape paintings. The pastels down here are all Nupastels. They're harder pastel sticks, and I'll be using those to block in the painting. This is a piece of pipe insulation foam that I'll be using to blend in my very first layer. All right, spring flowering trees can be challenging to paint because we don't want them to look too spotty, right? Too busy. We have to simplify and edit the clutter and really simplify all of those leaves and flowers, right? So 3 steps. What I do is I first begin with a value block in. So I block in the big shapes and I assign them a color and a value. Next, I layer these foliage pillows, and I'm going to talk more about what I mean by foliage pillows as I get going with the painting. But after I have those blocked in and color layered on the pillows, I can start to add just a few leaf shapes. So in other words, leaf and flowers, I should say. I don't paint every single flower or every single leaf. I suggest the mass, which is the pillow, and I then put in a few detailed so that the viewer can fill in the rest. So that's going to be the name of the game for today's painting. So let's get started with that. I am going to just use a pencil to lightly block in or do a drawing of my trees. I'm going to make the horizon right about here. I don't want it to be halfway. I'm going to eliminate the road and I'm going to simplify all of the distant trees and add a little bit of sky. But what I have to do now is have to figure out what trunks I'm going to put in for my dogwood trees. And I think I'm going to just use what's in the photo as inspiration, but take out my artistic license to arrange them in a more pleasing way. So what do I mean by that? I have to have a variety of shapes and sizes. I don't want the tree trunks to all be the same thickness, and I'm going to add a third. I'll have that one cross over here, kind of disappear. I don't want them to be all the same thickness. I don't want them to all go in the same direction. I want them to be a little bit of variety and the spacing in between them to be unequal. They are the sunlight. I'm going to just put a little sun up here is coming from the right hand side, so there's some cast shadows from these tree trunks. Now you got to be careful because I invented the tree trunks, right? I have to make sure that the cast shadows match up with the trees I invented and not the trees in the photo, because I'm not really painting what's in the photo. All right, now we have all of these the dogwood flowers before the leaf shapes appear. So these are all kind of pillows, I like to call them, of flowers. And I can actually go into my reference photo and draw around them to kind of get an idea of where these pillow shapes are. And what I'm going to do is just put in big pillow shapes. Think of them as big masses of the flowers. And I like how this one kind of goes up and down. It's kind of crowned. It's got a little bit of a peak. Again, when I'm making these pillows, I want to make sure that they are varied, on equal spacing, different sizes. Now, what about all of these little flowers that are coming off the edges? I'm not going to worry about those. We can put those in later in the painting. I'm only worried about the bigger masses of the flowering shapes. And then we have just a little bit of hint of some distant trees in the background, and the rest I'm going to make sky. Now that I have my initial drawing, I'm going to go in with some of those hard pastels and block in the shapes by value. So I want to look and see where the darkest areas are and where the lightest areas are. And I'm going to assign them a color. And just to keep things simple, I'm going to begin by blocking in the tree trunks with a dark blue. And I have to make sure that my tree trunks are grounded, right? So they're not going to just end. I got to pull some of the roots away from the main trunk there. And then this guy kind of went like this. And then I had a third that kind of crossed over. So those are, and then they're casting shadows, so I'm going to use the dark for that. And I'm also going to darken the immediate foreground. All right, so I think that's going to be all the dark shape. I am going to put in a few smaller branches while I have the dark pastel in my hand, just to support all of these pillows of foliage. But those are basically my dark shapes. So then I say, okay, well, what's going to be the light value in this scene? Well, we look and we say, oh, those are white dogwood blossoms. Those are probably going to be the lightest value. And yes, they are, but also I'm going to put in the sky. So the sky is also going to be a light value. So I'm going to put in a light blue-green to get us started. And the sky kind of goes behind these pillows. And the pillows themselves are also a light value, but I'm going to do something a little bit different. Instead of blocking them in with a light, I'm going to block them in with a middle value, greenish, kind of a gray-green. And you might be thinking, well, why are you blocking in your pillows with a darker value when obviously those flowers are light? And the reason why is because if I were to block them in with a light value right away, I'm going to pull this foliage all the way up to the edge just to connect that tree, to connect the tree to the outside of the painting so it doesn't feel like they're cramped. They're growing up off the page. But why I'm blocking it in with a dark? Because the light needs something underneath so that it can feel lighter. So I'm actually going ahead and blocking them in with a little bit of a darker value, and then we'll gradually turn on the lights. All right, what do we have left? Well, we have those distant trees. I'm going to use, I think I can, let's make this a little bit more turquoise. I want to use a cooler color to simplify all of those trees that are in the distance. So I'm using a turquoise because it's blue, but it's a pretty color for spring. We're going to cover it up, but we need to have some interesting color underneath. All right, what do we have left? We have some grassy areas. Now I have to simplify all of this. I have way too much things happening in my reference photo, and to be effective with my painting, I really need to simplify. I do like the play of light that's coming on the grass in between those shadow areas, so I'm going to go in with a really bright limey green to kind of indicate that bright spring green on the lawn. And whatever is left, I'm going to just simply assign it a middle value, and I selected a yellow ochre color because this is going to be the dirt underneath the rest of the grass. So that is it when it comes to the first block in. I'm going to take it a step further. Remember I showed you that piece of pipe insulation foam? I'm going to use that to rub in this first layer. Blend it in, push the pastel into the paper. It's going to do three things. It's going to give me more tooth, right? So I can push this pastel into the paper so I can get more layers. It's going to cover up all of those light areas where if I'm working on a light tone paper, Uart is kind of a light manila yellowish color. I want to cover up all the light bits. If I'm working on white paper, same thing. If I'm working on a tone piece of paper, I don't worry about this step as much. So if I'm working on a piece of paper that has color, it's not as critical. But with the light paper, it is important that I cover up all those light bits, because if I don't, I'm going to be tempted to put too many layers of pastel to cover it up, and then I won't be able to be as fresh and as expressive with my mark making, and I can very easily get carried away and start creating a muddy painting. All right, the third reason why I blend it all in, and now you can see, is I like to have my initial underpainting or first layer be out of focus. So soft and dreamy and out of focus, because that's going to give me the ability to decide where I'm going to leave things out of focus and where I'm going to add more clarity and more detail. So beginning with things out of focus, give me more room to be more expressive. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to move on to using the softer pastels that I have on my tray. And by the way, I like to pre-select my pastel before I start painting, because it allows me to be a little bit more intuitive when I paint, as well as more efficient, because I don't have to keep looking in my various boxes to find the right pastel, the right color and value. I'm going to have to do a little trimming to this trunk here, but I will get to that. All right, what I'm doing now is I'm reinforcing the dark areas. So I've used a softer pastel with blue, and now I'm going to layer on top of that a pastel of the same value. This happens to be a dark reddish burgundy color. And I'm looking at my photo for ideas as far as what color those trunks actually are. And to me, they feel a little bit on the purplish side. So I'm coming along the sunlit side. Remember, the sun was coming from the right. And adding slightly lighter value. This is a kind of a gray violet, and just kind of skipping over so I can get that feeling of roughness of the tree trunk. And I'm going to leave the trunks alone at this point. I might come back and adjust those as we go on, but I'm going to leave them for now. Now, what I want to do is try to think about working my way from the top to the bottom so that I can remember that I want to create a believable feeling of depth. Now, that is actually our focus for the month of May over on my Patreon group. So if you're watching this May 2023, join us over on Patreon. We are going to do a deep dive into the idea of how to create believable feeling of depth. We're also going to focus on the concept of edges, that all-important concept of edges that we oftentimes overlook when we paint, but it's so important. So what I'm doing now is I'm starting with the sky, and I used a nice warmish blue, and I'm going to come in with more of a blue violet, a lighter blue violet, and I'm using the pastel to help carve into those pillows, those foliage pillows. By negative painting around these pillows of foliage, I'm starting to pull them out so that they're more visible. I'm starting to give them a more interesting silhouette or outline, and I'm starting to add some interest to the sky. I'm doing what I like to call a sparkling sky is one way to put it, but what I'm doing is using blues that are very close in value and just layering them on top of one another so they kind of vibrate and they kind of look a little bit more lively than if I just use one solid shade of blue. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some color to the distant tree line there, and I want them to feel like they're in the distance, so I know that I need to use some lighter, cooler, perhaps bluer colors. I'm going to start actually bluer than I want them to be. That's too blue. That looks like that would be a mountain blue. So let's modify them. I'm going to add a little bit of violet. Remember, this is spring. We have a lot of yellow greens, so adding some of the complement with some of the purples will help the yellows be more interesting. But I really need to push this back a little bit more, so I need to grab a green that is lighter, duller, and cooler. So gray or green. But I started by putting in the purples first so that I could have some color underneath. Here's a nice grayed yellow green that we can use to kind of hint at the fact that there's something in the distance. That's my whole goal, is to just have a feeling like, oh, there's stuff back there, but I don't need to have every single leaf or tree trunk back there. It's just a mix of layers of color. The other thing that I can do is break that up with our sky color. And this is something that I will often do towards the end of a painting, but I'll just kind of start the process so that we don't have a line of distant trees that are too straight, like someone came and gave them a haircut. We want to avoid that. All right, so now what we're going to do is work on those foliage pillows. We already started with a darker value. We know the flowers of the dogwood to be very light, almost a creamy yellow, almost white. So I'm not going to use white until maybe the very end. So I want to start by building up some of the darker colors that I see. And I'm starting with this whole idea of pillows because I want to have masses of color. So that was a grayed down yellowy green. Here's one that's a little bit warmer, has a little bit more yellow. I want to have masses of foliage that I will then pull out some of the smaller flower shapes. That was another one. I'm going to see how many layers I can get within this mass before I turn on the lights. How about a little bit more of this golden ochre? Notice I'm starting to pull the pillows on top of the branches and trunks, which is one of the reasons why I put those in early on. They kind of looked a little bit strange early on, but it was important that I put them in so that I could then cover them up. Now I'm going to get a little bit lighter. This is a slightly lighter value gray-green. The important thing that I'm trying to remember is that I'm going at this very gradually. In other words, I'm not going too quickly to the lightest light. So the lightest light that I'll probably use is, I'm going to just make it here, is going to be this. But I don't want to jump to the lightest light too quickly. I'll just leave it there so we can say that's our goal. But I want to gradually build up the colors, the layers. Here we're going to go slightly lighter, same grayish green tone, but a little bit lighter. We're just kind of sneaking up on those lighter flowers, and I'm using the side of the pastel to create larger masses, pillows. Now you can see how as I'm getting lighter, the stuff that we put in the distance is starting to feel like it's going back further because it's cooler than the yellows and greens that I'm using, the gray yellow greens. Need to get even lighter, but I want to address what's happening on the ground first, and then we'll kind of pull the whole thing together. We're getting to the finish here, actually. It's not a very long process if you start with big, simple shapes. So let's address these cast shadows. So we've got green grass. So the cast shadows are going to be a darker value of that grass. So I'm going to take a dark green. Also, they're going to be darker at the base of the tree. So I'm going to actually use a really dark purple to ground these tree shapes right at the base. And kind of sneak up the side just a little bit. But as the shadow moves away from the... Oh, that's a little bit too... That's a little bit too light as well. As it moves away from the tree, it's going to get a little bit lighter and a little bit more diffused. But if you really want your cast shadows to be effective, you have to think about the influence of what's happening in the sky. So we've got a blue sky, so there's going to be some of that influence in the shadow. So I'm going to very lightly, that might not be dark enough, very lightly scumble a little bit of blue. That's a little bit, there we go. That was too light. A little bit of blue on top of the green. So we have that influence of the sky to make our shadows feel a little bit more lively. Now we've got to come in with our green grass. Now I put a little bit of yellow down. Remember, I was calling that the dirt color. Just because, yeah, we're going to make it green, but we want to make it a little bit more interesting. One thing you have to be careful of with cast shadows is that you don't want fingers, right? So we need to make sure that the shadow shapes are varied. So I'm going to pull a little bit of grass so that I have a little more variation in those shadows. Now I really like that really bright green in the distance, so I'm going to start with a nice... Isn't that a beautiful spring green? That's perfect for that distant area right there. But then it gets a little bit darker right in this, right around the trees. A little bit of shade going on. And let's hit it with that really light, bright grassy green. This nice yellow green. Right where the sun might be hitting it. Right in between. And I'm going to let a lot of that underpainting peek through because it's not about this, it's about the tree. So now that we have that in place, let's go back and revisit our tree. I feel like I need to add some more yellow into the tree shape. Now, here's where I have to start to pay attention. Where is the light coming? I don't want to illuminate the entire tree. I only want to illuminate or turn on the lights on the right side of the foliage pillows because that's where most of the light is coming from. I'm also going to start to add some more indications of the shape of those blossoms. So this guy is supposed to come down like this. Let's change the shape of this guy right in here. So I want to keep some of the darker areas in place. That's going to help give volume to my pillows. If I were to put this lighter value, this light yellow that I'm working with now everywhere, then the whole tree would become flat. So we just kind of scoot around, so keeping in mind where's the light hitting some of these blossoms. And I'm using the tip of the pastel to get some smaller flower type marks. Alright, so that's one layer of light. We're coming into the finish where we're trying to get a little bit more detail and turn on the lights. So this is a kind of a dull tan yellow, I guess you could say. I'm going to sneak that over in here. Now here's also where I have to start to pay attention, and it's happening. It happens every time. I've got even pillows. My pillows have just all lined themselves up and made them the same shape and size. That's something that our brain likes to do, likes to put order, make order out of chaos, but we don't want chaos. We actually prefer looking at things that are a little bit uneven, right? It's more interesting, but our brain wants to put things in order. So what I've done here is I've broken up those pillow shapes. You have to be careful because when we're working at breaking up even, a lot of times we re-even things. What do I mean by that? We make changes, and before we know it, we've done the same exact thing, only we moved it over a little bit more. So when you're trying to break up even, really stay on top of it and don't let your thinking brain re-even things up. All right, now I'm coming in with an even lighter value, and I'm pressing hard. Now I'm shouting. Notice in the beginning of the painting, for several layers, I was whispering. I was using the side of the pastel and getting a very light touch so that I could get nice layers where all the layers were working together. So you can see all the colors working together in here. But now I'm pressing very hard and I'm making shouting marks. These allow me to use thicker layers of pastel, and so they contrast better with the thinner colorful layers that I've used. But you have to be careful here because this is where things can get even again, but it's also where we can get spotty, right? We want to avoid, what's that guy doing way over there? We want to avoid spotty. So too many dots of flowers, it's kind of like this. You're enjoying the process and you have a few, and a few feel really good, right? And then you just keep going, and then before you know it, everything is spotty. So this is where I recommend you take a minute to step back and evaluate things. And so what I want to do before I finish is just add some sunlight to the edge of the tree trunks. I had initially added that kind of gray purple, but let's add a little bit of peach just to kind of give it a little bit of light, soften it a little bit. And the other thing that I like to do at this stage is to come in and redo some of the smaller branches before I make those finishing touches, because we want to make sure that our tree can support the weight of all this foliage. So I'm just going in, and this is actually a black pastel. I'm going to cover some more of those up, but this is a good time to go in and reinforce those tree trunks. I think it would be nice to have something coming off of the edge right in here, just to give some interest to those tree trunks. All right, coming in for the finish. Couple things. Let's go in first and that one's too light. Refresh some of our sky holes. So we're going to take our sky color and we're going to work into some of these pillows and we're going to break them up. So we're having a pillow fight here. We are coming in and breaking up the pillows to make the tree feel a little bit more delicate, because that's what it really is. They are, the flowering trees are very delicate. And by the way, this same process is what I do for any flowering tree, whether it be apple trees, cherry trees, pear trees. You're just going to be changing some of the colors on some of the foliage, and of course some of the flowers. But start with the pillows, and then we're going to break up those pillows. So I'm doing some negative painting with my sky color to just give a little bit more airy, delicate feeling to this tree. So just kind of squint at it and try to say, okay, where do I need to break up some of those pillows so that they can have a little bit more of a delicate feeling. And then finally I'm going to come in with my lightest light. I think this is a little bit lighter. And this is where I really want the viewer to look. So we've got to create movement around the painting. So one way we can do that is to really reinforce, sorry about that, reinforce some of this pattern of light and shadow on the ground. right? So we kind of enter into the painting. Let's reinforce some of that warm light on the tree trunks so that we want to go up into the trees. And then once we're there, I'm going to let some of these little flower shapes float over the bottom part of my tree trunks. Remember, we created the mask, those were the pillows, and now we're starting to use little stippling marks to paint those individual blossoms. And because of this is the lightest value, our eye's going to pick up on them. Also, we're going to create some hard edges with these flower shapes. If you want to learn more about edges and really practice this idea of creating depth, be sure to join us over on Patreon. Again, the link is in the description. It's just patreon.com/Karen Margulis. Love to have you join us. We're going to really reinforce these ideas. Oh, let's give a little blossom to the end of that branch right there. And let's end it with a little hint of color, with a little bit of a deeper blue on the edge of these trunks, just for fun. I think I'm going to stop here. This is always a good time to stop, to reevaluate what's happening, come back with fresh eyes, make any adjustments after coming back with fresh eyes. But I hope that you've enjoyed this idea of simplifying a busy spring landscape. Block it in by value, simple shapes, create those pillows of foliage and flowers, and then gradually add the light or add the brightest colors and gradually add smaller and smaller. Suggest some and let the viewer fill in the rest. Hope you've enjoyed this demo. I've had fun painting for you today. Thanks for joining us. Let's paint.